Every morning before the sun had fully risen above the tall ridges of Kumbasa Hills, my grandmother would be there, outside her mud brick house, wrapped in her red shawl. The shawl had once been bright and beautiful, patterned with swirls of gold thread, but after many years the colors had faded, leaving behind only a dull crimson, frayed at the edges. Still, she wore it with pride. She would drag out her three-legged stool, set it down on the hard earth just beyond her doorstep, and sit there silently, like a guard over her land. She never allowed anyone else to carry the stool for her. It was an old wooden thing, heavy for her thin frame, but she insisted on doing it herself. "A woman who cannot carry her own stool," she once told me, "cannot carry her own life." Her name was Madame Lulenga, though most people in the village simply called her Mayo Lulenga. To me, she was just grandmother. That stool was where she spent her mornings, nodding to passers-by, exchanging greetings with neighbors on their way to the fields, and sometimes calling out to travelers from other villages who stopped at the communal well down the path. Her face was a landscape of wrinkles, each fold holding a story, and her smile, though tired, carried a strange authority, like she knew things others didn't. People said she was the oldest woman in the village. Some whispered she might even be the oldest in the district. No one knew her exact age. What everyone knew, however, was that Madame Lulenga was one of the wealthiest people in Kumbasa. She owned fields of maize and groundnuts, goats and chickens, and a small herd of cattle that grazed on the slopes beyond the river. She had orchards of mango, guava, and pawpaw trees. To her grandchildren, my sisters, my cousin Atupele, and me, this meant there was always food in the house. It was after the death of my parents that I came to live with her. I was barely 10 when a car accident took both of them. My father's relatives had stripped everything from us in the city, his shop, his money, even the small house we lived in, leaving my sisters and me with nothing. Grandmother took us in, without complaint, even though she already had her late husband's nephew, Atupele, under her care. Life in the village was a harsh contrast to the noisy bustle of the city. My two elder sisters, Chikandi and Miriam, found it hardest to adjust. They complained about the rough roads, the absence of electricity, and the endless farm work. But for me, though I missed my parents, there was a strange comfort in the quiet rhythms of village life, waking to the sound of roosters, fetching water from the well, watching goats kick up dust as they ran. Grandmother ruled her home with a quiet but unshakable authority. She was never quick to anger, but when she did speak harshly, it carried the weight of law. She punished liars without mercy, and thieves even more so. Still, she was generous. Anyone hungry who came to her door would not leave empty-handed. But the village whispered. They whispered that Madame Lulenga was no ordinary woman, that her wealth came not from her hard work, but from darker things. They said she had killed her husband years ago through witchcraft, and that she stole harvests from other people's fields at night, her shadow slipping across the land like a hyena. They said she could look at you and know what sins you carried. I never believed them. She was a Christian woman, faithful at church every Sunday, her Bible worn and underlined. She prayed before every meal. To me, the rumors were only the envy of poor villagers who could not stand seeing an old widow prosper. Still, children at school taunted me, calling me the witch's grandson. I fought more times than I can remember because of those words. Every time my fists bruised, my heart hardened with the certainty that people had no idea who my grandmother really was. But then came that morning. It was a morning much like any other. The sun was still soft, painting the sky with orange and pale blue. Grandmother had dragged out her stool, sat down in her red shawl, and I sat on the steps beside her, kicking at the dust. From down the path came Chief Mateso, one of our nearest neighbors and the oldest man in his family line. He was walking slowly, leaning on his stick, his bald head gleaming in the light. He was known for his temper, but he always greeted grandmother with a respect that surprised me. "Good morning, Mayo Lulenga," he said, stopping before our house. "Good morning, Chief Mateso," she replied with her small smile. "How are your fields?" "My oxen have been busy," he said, with a puff of pride. "The maize is strong this year." Grandmother tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "Your oxen?" "Yes. They are strong animals, the chief boasted. Grandmother's smile vanished. Your oxen trampled my maize last night. I went to the field myself and saw their hoof prints. They ate from the edge of my crop. You owe me for what I have lost. Chief Mateso laughed, a short, sharp sound. Nonsense. My oxen are tied every evening. They cannot wander. You accuse me falsely. I do not accuse falsely, she replied calmly. I saw the damage myself. You will repay me. The chief's face darkened. I will not. You are an old woman clinging to riches. Do not try to put your hunger upon me. My oxen will not feed you. For a long moment, my grandmother said nothing. She sat back, her shawl catching the morning breeze, her wrinkled hands folded on her lap. Then she spoke, her voice low. Very well, Chief Mateso. We shall see. The old man frowned. What is that supposed to mean? But grandmother did not answer. She turned her gaze away, looking beyond him, at the hills rising in the distance. The silence stretched, heavy, until finally the chief huffed and walked off, his stick stabbing the ground as he muttered to himself. I thought little of it at the time. To me it sounded like nothing more than an argument between neighbors. But the way grandmother's eyes lingered on the hills unsettled me, as though she had spoken not to the chief, but to the land itself. That was the first time I wondered, just faintly, whether the whispers about her might carry a shadow of truth. Life in Kumbasa was slow, but it was never easy. Every day followed the same rhythm. Roosters crowing before dawn, women heading to the river with clay pots balanced on their heads, men disappearing into the fields with hoes over their shoulders, children running barefoot to school. For my sisters and me, adjusting to that rhythm was like trying to dance to a drumbeat we did not know. In the city, we had electricity, running water, even a television. But in the village, water had to be fetched from the well at least 3 times a day. Firewood had to be gathered before cooking, and meals took hours to prepare. Miriam, my eldest sister, hated it most. She was 16 at the time and carried herself with the pride of a city girl. She often complained, "Why should I pound maize like some servant? I'm not a villager." She cried almost every evening in the first month. My second sister, Chikondi, at 14, was quieter. She did her work, but I often caught her staring at the horizon, lost in thought, as though her mind was still in the city streets we had left behind. I was younger, only 10 then, and more adaptable. To me, the village was both frightening and fascinating. The nights were darker than any I had ever known. Stars crowded the sky so thickly that it felt like we lived under a roof of glittering dust. Strange insects hummed in the grass, and jackals sometimes howled in the distance. I was scared, but also curious. At the heart of it all was my grandmother, Madame Lulenga. She was the sun around which our small family revolved. Each morning she sent us to different tasks. Miriam to help weed the cassava field, Chikondi to tend to the goats, Atupale to collect firewood, and me to gather chicken eggs or fetch water. She worked harder than all of us combined, her bent back never seeming to slow her down. Her land stretched farther than the eye could see. Acres of maize and groundnuts, orchards of guava and pawpaw trees, a small grove of bananas by the stream. She treated the land as though it were alive, speaking to it softly as she worked. "Grow well, my children," she would murmur as she pressed seeds into the soil. "Feed us, and I will care for you." Sometimes I wondered if the land answered her back. People often came to her for help. Women who had no food came with empty baskets, and grandmother filled them with groundnuts or maize meal. Men who had sick animals asked for her advice, and she always seemed to know some herb or trick to heal them. Children came for fruits, and she gave them freely, but while they took from her hands, they did not give her their trust. Behind her back, they whispered the same things. "That old woman is too rich for her age. She must have killed her husband to live so long. Be careful. Her eyes are dangerous." It angered me. I fought anyone who dared say it to my face. How could they speak of her like that when she was the one keeping so many of them from starving? Still, there were moments that unsettled even me. One evening, for example, I saw her sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. She was muttering under her breath, words I could not understand. When I asked her what she was saying, she smiled and replied, "Prayers for our family." But her voice had sounded different, heavy, and there were her dreams. Sometimes in the dead of night, I would wake to hear her calling out names of people in the village. She would groan, twist in her sleep, then sit up suddenly, whispering, "It is done." By morning she would act as though nothing had happened. Atupale, my cousin, noticed these things too. He was a year younger than me, but wiser in many ways. His father had died when he was very young, and grandmother had raised him all his life. He was used to her ways. "Don't ask too many questions," he would tell me whenever I brought up something strange. "Grandmother knows things we do not." I both trusted and feared him when he said that. There was one habit of hers that the whole village noticed. She never joked, ever. Her words were always taken seriously, because she spoke with a certainty that unsettled people. She could say something as simple as, "It will rain tomorrow." And when the clouds rolled in the next day, no one doubted her again. It was because of this that the quarrel with Chief Mateso from the week before lingered in people's minds. Everyone had heard her words, "We shall see." That phrase carried weight. When the chief's eldest son suddenly fell ill, only days after the argument, tongues wagged. The young man had been healthy, strong as an ox, yet one morning he complained of a headache, and by sunset he was dead. No doctor, no healer could explain it. People whispered louder now. Some said the curse of Madame Lulenga had struck. Others said it was coincidence. Grandmother never addressed the rumors. She sat in her red shawl each morning as though nothing had happened, smiling faintly at those who passed by, her stool planted firmly in the same spot. I wanted to believe she had nothing to do with it. I told myself it was a lie, a trick of grief, an illness that had come and gone swiftly. But a seed of doubt had already been planted in me. That seed grew when I saw the way people looked at her now, not just with envy, but with fear. Children no longer came to play in our yard. Women who had once chatted with her at the well now avoided her gaze. Even at church, though she sang hymns as loudly as ever, the congregation seemed uneasy. At home, however, she was the same. She laughed when Atupale made jokes. She scolded Miriam for her laziness. She gave me extra roasted ground nuts when I did well in school. She was grandmother, stern, loving, unshakable. But at night, when the wind rustled the trees and owls hooted in the distance, I sometimes wondered, who exactly was this woman who carried her own stool every morning, sat wrapped in her red shawl, and looked out at the world with eyes that seemed to see more than they should? In every village, there is one man who believes himself untouchable. In Kumbasa, that man was Chief Mateso. He was not our official leader. That role belonged to the government-appointed village headman, but in truth, Mateso ruled. His wealth made him powerful. He owned the largest herds of cattle, vast fields of tobacco and maize, and a dozen men who worked for him in exchange for food and protection. If he walked through the market, people bowed their heads and greeted him with exaggerated respect. But what most people remembered about him was not his wealth. It was his pride. He carried it like a shield, never letting anyone forget who he was. He spoke in proverbs that glorified himself, demanded the first seat at every gathering, and expected silence whenever he raised his voice. Grandmother was the only one who treated him like an ordinary man. The quarrel began in the heat of one market day. The sun blazed overhead, and the stalls bustled with people selling cassava, dried fish, tomatoes, and sugarcane. My sisters and I had followed grandmother, carrying baskets of ground nuts and pawpaws she planned to sell. As always, she wore her red shawl, her stool tucked under her arm. She set herself near the shade of a mango tree, arranged her goods neatly, and sat down. It wasn't long before Chief Mateso arrived. His entrance was like the arrival of a storm. 2 young men carried baskets overflowing with maize behind him. A third led a fat cow, meant to be slaughtered and sold in portions. Women gasped, men called out greetings, and the chief lifted his chin as though blessing them with his presence. He set his own stall near grandmother's spot. Too close, I thought. His helpers laid out the maize beside her pawpaws. I saw the faintest flicker of disapproval cross grandmother's face, though she said nothing at first. But as the morning wore on, trouble began. "Why buy from her?" one of Mateso's men shouted at a passerby who was reaching for grandmother's ground nuts. The chief's maize is fresher, stronger. Look at it. It grows like a lion's mane. People laughed, and some turned away from grandmother's stall to buy from the chief instead. Miriam muttered angrily under her breath, "They are mocking us." Grandmother ignored her. She sold quietly to those who still came, smiling at children, speaking little. But the chief was not satisfied. He moved closer, until his shadow stretched over her. "Old woman," he said in a voice loud enough for all to hear, "why do you bother with these small baskets? Leave the market to those of us who can feed a village. You should rest at home instead of sitting here like a stubborn goat." The crowd chuckled. Some nodded in agreement. I froze, waiting for grandmother's reply. She lifted her eyes slowly, meeting his without fear. Her voice was calm, yet it carried through the chatter like a drumbeat. "Chief, a single pawpaw may not fill a granary, but it can still sweeten a child's mouth. Do not despise small things." There was laughter from some of the women nearby, a ripple of amusement at her words. The chief's face darkened. He hated being challenged, especially by a woman, and especially by her. "You dare compare yourself to me?" he spat. "You, an old widow with nothing but a stool and a shawl? I am a man of cattle, a man of fields. My wealth runs deeper than your grave ever will." Gasps spread through the market. It was one thing to mock her goods. It was another to insult her life. Grandmother did not flinch. She looked him in the eye, her lips tightening only slightly. Then, very softly, she said, "We shall see." The words fell like stones in a still pond. The market grew silent. Even the flies seemed to pause. "We shall see." 3 words, but everyone heard the weight behind them. Everyone knew what it meant when Madame Lulenga said something. She was not given to idle threats or careless speech. Chief Mateso laughed, though the sound was hollow. "Yes, we shall see," he repeated mockingly. He turned away, but his steps were heavier than before. That night, the quarrel became the only topic in the village. By the firesides, in the beer huts, along the pathways, people whispered, "Did you hear what she told him? She cursed him in front of everyone. He should never have provoked her. But she is just an old woman. What can she do to a chief?" By the next morning, the whispers had grown into stories. Some swore they had seen her eyes flash like lightning when she spoke. Others claimed her stool shook, as if the earth itself listened to her words. When news came that the chief's eldest son had fallen suddenly ill, the whispers turned into certainty. The boy had been strong, a hunter who could run for miles without tiring. Yet he awoke with a headache, and by nightfall, he was gone. No doctor could explain it. No medicine helped. He died as though something had simply plucked the life from his body. The village trembled with gossip. Many said it was punishment for the chief's arrogance. Others swore grandmother had called death upon the boy. At home, we heard the news from Atupele, who came running breathless from the center of the village. "It is true," he panted. "The chief's son is dead. They are saying grandmother killed him." My sisters gasped. Miriam crossed herself, whispering a prayer. I turned to grandmother, expecting shock, denial, something, but she remained as calm as ever. She stirred the pot of enzima on the fire and said only, "The earth takes whom it will." Her voice was steady, but her eyes seemed far away, like someone listening to a song only she could hear. That night, I could not sleep. The air was heavy, the insects louder than usual, and I kept remembering her words at the market. "We shall see." Now the village had seen, and they were afraid. The funeral of Chief Mateso's son was unlike any gathering I had ever seen. People poured in from every corner of Kumbasa and the neighboring villages. Drummers beat slow rhythms, women wailed in unison, and men sat in groups whispering to each other. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and sorrow. Yet beneath the grief, I felt something else, fear. It was there, in the way people glanced at each other, in the way their eyes slid toward grandmother when she passed. Grandmother did not avoid the funeral. She wrapped her red shawl tightly around her shoulders and went with us. Miriam tried to dissuade her, whispering, "People are blaming you. If you go, they'll only stare." But grandmother said, A death belongs to the whole village. I will not hide from my people." So we walked behind her, small shadows to her tall frame, carrying baskets of food she insisted on contributing. She moved with calm dignity, her stool under one arm as always, and when we reached the gathering, she set it down among the mourners and sat. The moment she lowered herself onto the stool, the crowd shifted uneasily. Conversations faltered, eyes narrowed. Some mothers pulled their children closer. It was as if her presence sucked the warmth out of the air. Chief Mateso sat on the opposite side, his face hard as carved stone. His eyes never left grandmother. He did not greet her, did not nod, did not even blink. The burial was long, filled with prayers, chants, and sobbing. When it ended, the chief stood and made a speech. His voice was thick with grief, but also sharp with accusation. "My son was taken before his time," he declared. "The earth does not swallow the young without reason. Among us walks a darkness, dressed in red, hiding behind kind words and gifts of food. But we know her shadow. We see her power." The people stirred. Some nodded. Some looked down at the ground. I felt Miriam's hand squeeze mine tightly. Grandmother said nothing. She sat still, her eyes steady, her face unreadable. When the speech ended, she stood, gathered her stool, and walked away. We followed, silent, as whispers rose like smoke behind us. The days that followed were heavy with suspicion. Women no longer stopped by our yard for fruits. Men passed grandmother on the path with forced politeness but hurried steps. Children, once eager to play, now ran the other way when they saw me or Atupele. Even at school, I heard the other boys whispering, "His grandmother killed the chief's son. Don't sit too close." "It might pass to you," I tried to fight back, but my words were weak against the weight of fear. At home, grandmother behaved as though nothing had changed. She rose at dawn, fetched water, worked in the fields, and sold her produce at the market. She never spoke of the chief's son, nor of the whispers. But I noticed small changes. She prayed longer at night, muttering words in a language I did not know. She often sat by the fire after we had gone to bed, her red shawl glowing in the light, her eyes fixed on the flames. One night, I gathered the courage to ask her, "Grandmother, did you do something to him?" Her gaze turned to me slowly. She did not scold me for asking, but her eyes were deep, unreadable. "The world is full of things you do not yet understand," she said softly. "Men fall, children rise, the wind shifts. Do not speak of blame when you cannot see the whole picture." Her answer did not comfort me. The chief, however, did not let the matter rest. He began to spread his own whispers, louder ones, carried on the tongues of his workers and followers. At the market, I overheard him telling a group of men, "An old woman should not have so much land. It is unnatural. She has bewitched the soil to yield for her while others struggle." Another time I heard him say, "She walks in the night. My guards have seen her. They say her shadow stretches farther than a human should, and the worst, if she could take my son, she can take any of yours." These words took root like weeds. Fear turned into resentment, resentment into anger. Soon small acts of hostility began. Our chickens went missing. Our maize field was trampled one night. At the well, women shifted to the other side when grandmother approached, refusing to draw water near her. Miriam grew bitter. Why should we suffer because of her pride? If she had just kept quiet at the market, none of this would have happened. Chikondi said little, but her silence spoke more than words. Atupele remained loyal, often defending grandmother in the village, but even he looked troubled at times. And me? I was torn. I loved her, admired her strength, and feared her all at once. When she smiled at me, I wanted to believe she was only my grandmother, but when she stared into the night with those strange, faraway eyes, I could not help but wonder, what if the whispers were true? One evening, as we sat by the fire, Atupele returned from the chief's compound with news. "They are saying a curse has fallen on the chief's family," he whispered. "His crops are withering. 2 of his goats were found dead this morning, stiff as wood. The people believe it is grandmother's doing. Miriam gasped. This is getting worse. Grandmother stirred the pot calmly. The earth takes. The earth gives. The chief reaps what he has sown. Atupele leaned closer, his voice urgent. But they are calling for a meeting. They want the headman to question you. For the first time, I saw grandmother pause. Her stirring slowed, her hand resting on the spoon. She did not look up, but I felt the air grow heavier around us. When men do not understand, she said finally, they seek someone to burn. Her words chilled me more than the night air. The meeting was set for 3 days later, and already the village was divided. Some believed grandmother was a curse, a danger that had to be dealt with. Others argued she had helped too many people to be condemned without proof. But fear is a louder voice than gratitude. At school, boys taunted me, "Your grandmother will be dragged out. They will tie her to a tree and beat her." I fought one of them until my nose bled, but inside I was afraid they might be right. That night, as I lay awake listening to the owls, I heard grandmother's voice outside the hut. She was speaking low to herself, or perhaps to the darkness. Her words were not in Chichewa, not in English, not in any tongue I knew. They were old, rolling, like stones tumbling down a river. The hair on my arms stood up, and I pulled the blanket over my head. The whispers in the village were growing louder, but the whispers from grandmother's lips were louder still, in my heart, in my dreams, in my fears. The day of the village meeting arrived heavy with expectation. From the moment the sun rose, people began gathering under the large baobab tree that served as our council place. Its thick trunk had seen countless disputes, marriages, and ceremonies. But that morning, it seemed darker, heavier, as though it too sensed the storm about to break. Grandmother dressed with care. She wrapped her red shawl neatly around her shoulders, tied a clean headscarf, and carried her stool as always. Miriam begged her not to go. "They will only accuse you," my sister said, tears in her eyes. "Please, let's stay home." But grandmother's reply was firm. "If a fire burns in your name, you must face it." Hiding only makes the flames higher, so we followed her, trembling shadows behind her steady stride. When we arrived, the whole village was there. Men sat cross-legged in rows, women clustered together with babies on their backs, children hovered at the edges, wide-eyed. Chief Mateso sat in front, dressed in his finest chitenje cloth, a walking stick across his lap. His expression was grim. The headman, a thin man with a nervous cough, stood to open the meeting. "We are gathered to speak of troubling matters," he began. "There are whispers in Kumbasa. Whispers of sickness, of curses, of death. We must clear the air before fear tears us apart." All eyes turned to grandmother. She lowered her stool, sat gracefully, and folded her hands in her lap. Chief Mateso wasted no time. He rose, his voice booming. "We know where the whispers begin. They begin with her." He pointed a thick finger at grandmother. "She cursed my son in the market. Days later he was dead. Now my fields wither, my animals die. And who prospers while others suffer? Who always prospers?" "This woman," the crowd murmured in agreement. Heads nodded. The tide was already against her. Grandmother did not flinch. She spoke in her calm, steady voice. "I cursed no one. I only said, we shall see. Death comes when it chooses, not when I command it. As for my fields, I work them with my hands. Perhaps if the chief humbled himself before the earth, it would bless him too." Gasps rippled through the crowd. To speak so boldly in front of the chief was dangerous. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others whispered that her defiance was proof of guilt. The headman coughed nervously. "Perhaps we should ask for witnesses. Did anyone see this woman doing unnatural things?" A man stood up. "I saw her walking at night, near the river. Her shadow was long, too long. I swear it touched the trees." Another woman rose. "I heard her calling names in her sleep." The next day, one of those people fell ill. One by one, voices joined in. Every strange habit, every rumor, every half-seen moment became evidence. Her chickens never die. Her harvests are always plenty. She talks to the fire. The air thickened with fear. I felt my stomach twist. None of these things proved anything. They were only stories, but stories can burn brighter than truth. Finally, the chief raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "We have been patient with her," he declared. "But patience cannot bury a son, cannot save our cattle, cannot bring back our harvests. This woman is dangerous. She must confess, or she must leave Kumbasa forever." The crowd erupted in agreement. "Yes, she must confess. Drive her out. She brings death." Miriam began to cry quietly beside me. Chikandi held her hand tightly. Atupali clenched his fists, his face pale with fury. But Grandmother remained calm. She lifted her gaze, looking around the circle of faces, faces that had once come to her for food, for help, for comfort, faces that now glared with fear and anger. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but carried like a drumbeat. "You are afraid of what you do not understand. You take the gifts of the earth and call them curses because they do not come to you. But hear me now, I have done no harm. My hands plant, my hands feed, my hands heal. If death walks this village, it is not because of me. It is because of the pride of men who believe they own what belongs to all." Her words silenced many, but they did not calm the chief. His face burned with rage. "Enough of riddles," he roared. "You will speak the truth, or we will make you speak it." At his signal, 2 of his men stepped forward. They carried ropes. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others falling into uneasy silence. I felt a scream rising in my throat, but my body froze. They were going to bind her. They were going to drag her out. Before they could touch her, Grandmother rose. She lifted her stool slowly and tucked it under her arm. Then she looked at the men with a gaze so steady that they faltered in their steps. "Do not place your hands on me," she said quietly. "You do not know what you invite." The men hesitated, glancing at each other. Even in their loyalty, fear gleamed in their eyes. Chief Mateso shouted, "Seize her!" But before they could move, thunder cracked across the sky. The clear blue had darkened suddenly, clouds gathering as if summoned. A wind swept through the baobab tree, scattering dust and leaves. Women clutched their babies, men looked upward in awe and dread. And Grandmother, still, calm, her red shawl fluttering in the sudden wind, looked at the chief and said only, "We shall see." The words hung heavy in the air. The meeting broke in chaos. Some ran, others cried, and even the chief's men stepped back. The headmen shouted for order, but no one listened. The fear that had smoldered in whispers now blazed openly. That night, the village did not sleep. Fires burned in every yard. Voices rose in urgent arguments, and everywhere one question repeated. What was Madame Lulenga? That night, the sky broke open. Rain fell in sheets so heavy that it seemed the heavens themselves had tipped over. Thunder rolled endlessly, like drums of war, and lightning split the sky with jagged claws. The ground turned to mud, streams overflowed, and the river that ran past Kumbasa rose higher than anyone could remember. Inside Grandmother's house, we huddled together, the roof rattling under the storm. Atupali tried to be brave, but every crack of thunder made him flinch. Miriam prayed quietly under her breath, and Chikandi buried her face against my shoulder. I tried to stay strong, but fear gnawed at me, just as it gnawed at the whole village that night. Grandmother sat on her stool by the door, unmoved by the storm. Her red shawl draped loosely over her shoulders, her eyes reflecting the flashes of lightning. She looked almost like a shadow herself, an ancient, unshakable figure carved out of the storm. "Grandmother," I whispered, Are you making this happen?" Her gaze turned to me, sharp as the lightning. "The storm is not mine, Asumani. The sky belongs to itself. But when people spit into the wind spits back." Remember that I didn't understand her words then, not fully, but I felt their weight. By morning, the village was in ruins. The chief's granaries had collapsed, his maize washed away by the flood. Several huts had been struck by lightning. Even the great baobab had lost a massive branch, which now lay cracked on the ground like the broken arm of a giant. People gathered in disbelief, mourning their losses. Children cried, women wailed, and men stood silent, staring at what had been destroyed. And once again, their eyes turned to grandmother. She sat still all night, someone whispered. The storm did not touch her house. Her roof is dry, her fields untouched. Tell me that is not witchcraft. The whispers grew, bitter as the storm had been violent. By midday, fear had turned to anger. People spoke openly now, no longer just behind hands. She must be driven out, cried one man whose goats had drowned. She cursed us with this storm, shouted another. Why should we suffer while she thrives? The chief, still grieving his son, seized the moment. He stood before the villagers, his voice heavy with authority. Last night proves what I said. This woman is not one of us. She has brought death to my family and destruction to our land. If she stays, more storms will come. More lives will be lost. The people roared their agreement. Miriam clutched my hand. They'll kill her, she whispered. I looked at grandmother, but she did not tremble. She did not beg. She simply stood tall, her red shawl glowing like fire in the daylight. You blame me for the sky's anger, she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. But you do not look at your own greed, your own pride. You have forgotten the ways of the earth. You take without giving, and now you pay the price. If you cast me out, it will not save you. Her words only fanned the flames. The villagers shouted louder, demanding action. Some picked up stones, others brandished sticks. The headman tried to calm them. We must follow custom, he said nervously. She must face a trial. If she is innocent, the spirits will protect her. If she is guilty, he did not finish. He did not need to. The trial would be worse than exile. That night the council met in secret, but word spread quickly. The decision was made. Grandmother would face the river test. At dawn, she would be bound and thrown into the swollen waters of the river. If she drowned, she would be declared innocent, her soul free. If she floated, she would be guilty, and the people would stone her on the riverbank. When I heard the sentence, my blood turned to ice. I rushed home, tears burning in my eyes. Grandmother, we have to run. Tonight, we can leave before sunrise. We can go to another village. We can hide. But grandmother only shook her head. Run from death, Asumani? Death runs faster. No, child, the river test is not for me. It is for them. To see whether their fear is stronger than their faith. Her calmness broke me. I fell to my knees. Please, grandmother. They'll kill you. And I cannot lose you too. For the first time in a long while, her eyes softened. She reached out, her wrinkled hand brushing my cheek. You have more strength than you know. Do not waste it on tears. Tomorrow, whatever happens, you must remember my words. That night was the longest of my life. Sleep never came. I sat awake, listening to the restless village, the storm clouds still grumbling faintly in the distance. Every sound, every whisper outside made me jump. I kept waiting for someone to barge into our hut and drag her away. But grandmother slept peacefully on her mat, as though nothing awaited her at dawn. When morning came, the entire village marched to the river. The swollen waters churned and foamed, hungry and wild. People crowded the banks, their voices rising in chants, in prayers, in curses. The chief stood tall, his stick raised. Today the spirits will reveal the truth, he declared. Grandmother was brought forward, her hands bound with thick rope. But she walked with steady steps, her red shawl bright against the gray sky. Her eyes found mine in the crowd, and I felt the weight of everything she had ever been to me: guardian, protector, mystery, and fear. The men prepared to throw her into the river. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst. And then, just as they lifted her toward the water, she spoke. If the river takes me, it is your shame. If the river spares me, it is your curse. Either way, Kumbasa will remember this day. The crowd shivered. The chief gave the order, and with a great splash my grandmother disappeared into the raging river. The river swallowed her whole. For a moment, there was silence. Every villager craning their necks to see, children balanced on their fathers' shoulders, women clutching their breasts, men holding their breath. The only sound was the roar of the swollen water, churning and foaming as if eager to keep its prize. I felt my knees weaken. Miriam covered her face. Chikondi began to sob openly. Atupale whispered, "She's gone." Seconds stretched into eternity. My heart pounded so hard that my ears rang with the sound. Then, suddenly, the river broke. Grandmother rose to the surface, not flailing, not gasping, not struggling like someone fighting for life. She floated, calm, unhurried, as though the river itself held her gently. Her red shawl spread wide around her like wings, glowing against the gray water. Her face was turned upward, her eyes closed, her lips moving as if in prayer. Gasps erupted from the crowd. "She floats!" someone cried. "The river rejects her!" another shouted. "She is guilty!" But others looked terrified. Some began to whisper prayers, some turned their backs, refusing to watch. The old women wailed, rocking back and forth, their voices carrying across the water. Chief Mateso's face turned to stone. He raised his stick high. "The spirits have spoken! She is guilty! She has bewitched us all!" The villagers roared in response, their anger and fear fusing into a frenzy. Stones were picked up, ready to be hurled when she was dragged to shore. But before the men could move to pull her out, grandmother did something no one expected. Her eyes snapped open, and she spoke, her voice carrying over the roar of the river, louder than the thunder that had split the skies. "You call me witch, but it is your greed that curses this land. You cast me into the waters, yet the waters lift me higher. You spit my name in hatred, yet it is my breath that the wind carries. You wanted judgment. Now judgment will come." The storm that had been grumbling in the distance suddenly cracked overhead. Lightning lit up the river, blinding white, and thunder crashed so loudly that even the bravest men stumbled back in fear. The waters surged upward, higher than before, as though the river itself answered her words. Her body did not sink. She drifted slowly to the bank, the current delivering her as gently as a mother lays a child down. When her feet touched the mud, the villagers scattered backward. No one dared to approach. Even the chief's men, strong and loyal, dropped their ropes and stood trembling. Grandmother rose to her full height. Her red shawl clung wet against her thin frame, but she looked taller, more fearsome than I had ever seen her. Her eyes burned with a fire that seemed not of this world. "You want me gone?" she said. "Then listen well. I will go when the earth itself commands me. Until then, if you raise another hand against me, this river will not stop at goats or cattle. It will take your children, your wives, your own breath. Kumbasa will drown silence." The only sound was the river rushing behind her. The villagers' fury had turned into terror. Some dropped to their knees, bowing. Others fled, their bare feet slapping against the wet earth. Mothers pulled their children close, shielding their faces. But Chief Mateso stood firm. Rage twisted his features. "This is trickery," he bellowed. "She is no prophet. She is a demon wearing an old woman's skin." He lifted his stick and stepped forward as though to strike her. Grandmother turned her gaze on him, sharp as a spear. "Mateso," she said, her voice low but carrying across the water, "do not test me. You have lost one son already. Do you wish to bury another?" The words cut through the air like a blade. The chief froze. His arm trembled, his stick still raised, but he could not bring it down. Whispers swirled through the crowd. She named his son's death. She knows things no one else does. She cannot be touched. At last, the chief lowered his stick. His face was dark with hatred, but even he knew that to strike her now would mean inviting something he could not control. Grandmother stepped past him, her wet shawl dripping. She did not hurry. She did not run. She simply walked, her stool under her arm, her eyes fixed on the path home. and the crowd parted for her. No one dared stop her. We followed in silence, still trembling from what we had seen. When we reached the house, Grandmother set down her stool outside, wrung the water from her shawl, and sat as she always did. The storm clouds slowly drifted away. The air grew quiet again, but nothing felt the same. That night the village buzzed with fear. Some claimed she had risen from the river like a spirit, no longer flesh and blood. Others whispered that she had struck a pact with the water itself. Some said she had cursed the chief directly, and that more death would follow. In our house, silence weighed heavy. No one dared speak of what had happened. But as I lay awake on my mat, my thoughts spiraled. I remembered her warning. If you cast me out, it will not save you. I remembered the way the storm obeyed her voice. And for the first time, I wondered if the stories the villagers told were not just fear and lies. Maybe, just maybe, my grandmother was not just an old woman with a red shawl. Maybe she truly carried power, power that the village had unleashed. The trial by river should have silenced the rumors. Grandmother had risen from the waters, walked home unbroken, and sat upon her stool as though nothing had happened. Any ordinary woman would have drowned. Any liar would have been dragged under. Yet she had returned, more feared than ever. But fear has a way of growing teeth. In the weeks that followed, whispers filled Kumbasa like smoke seeping into every hut. The villagers no longer dared to insult Grandmother openly, but in the quiet corners of the marketplace, by the wells, at the edge of the fields, their voices hissed. She cannot die. She walks with the river spirits. She has cursed the land. And then the strange happenings began. It started with the goats. 3 of Chief Mateso's best were found one morning lying by the riverbank. Their throats were torn out, their hooves missing. Flies buzzed over the carcasses, and the stench was so foul it clung to the air for days. No tracks, no sign of hyenas or lions, just silence and death. 2 days later, it was cattle. 5 cows belonging to the family of the church pastor were discovered the same way. Bloodied, mutilated, with parts missing as though taken for some dark ritual. The villagers were gripped by panic. At night, fires burned in every homestead, but even flames could not chase away the unease. Children were kept indoors, women refused to fetch water after sunset, and men gathered in trembling groups, spears clutched tightly, eyes darting at every shadow. And with each new attack, the whispers returned to Grandmother. This is her vengeance. The river gave her back, but she came with a beast. She sent something to punish us. Even I could not silence the doubts in my heart. Every night, I lay awake, listening. The night had never been so loud. Crickets chirped like warning drums, owls hooted mournfully, and in the distance came sounds no one could explain. Low growls, strange cries, the snapping of branches. Sometimes I swore I heard claws scratching against the walls of our house. One evening, as I sat with Atupale outside, he leaned close and whispered, "Ndola, do you think it is her?" I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say my grandmother was just an old woman who chewed ground nuts and dozed on her stool. But the image of her rising from the river burned in my mind, and my words faltered. "I don't know," I said at last, "but whatever it is, it started after the river." Atupele nodded grimly. "They say a beast walks now. Some call it a lion. Some call it a hyena. Some say it has no shape at all." He lowered his voice even further. "Last night, my uncle swears he saw it. A tall figure at the edge of the fields, with glowing eyes like fire." I shivered. "What did he do?" "He ran," Atupele said simply. "He said the thing did not chase him. It only stood watching." That night, I dreamed again. I saw Grandmother standing by the river, her shawl dripping wet. Her eyes were not hers. They glowed yellow, bright as embers. She beckoned to me, her voice like the wind through the trees. "You should have obeyed me, Ndola. You should have buried me as I commanded." I woke drenched in sweat, my throat raw from screaming. The following morning, word spread that a boy had gone missing. He was 12, from the far end of the village, last seen chasing chickens near the forest. His body was never found. The villagers' fear boiled over. "This is not the work of animals," shouted one man in the market. "This is a curse. The beast belongs to her," another cried. "We let her live, and now death walks among us." A group of men marched to Chief Mateso's compound, demanding action. They wanted grandmother cast out, banished from the village or worse. But the chief, still stung by her warning at the river, hesitated. He knew as well as we did that crossing her might bring something worse. So instead, he sent for a witch doctor. The man arrived one evening, tall and thin, his face painted with ash, his staff rattling with bones and charms. The villagers gathered around him as he stood in the center of the square, his voice low and heavy. "I smell it," he said, sniffing the air. "I smell the shadow that walks among you. This is no lion, no hyena. This is a spirit unchained." "What spirit?" someone asked, trembling. The witch doctor's eyes glowed in the firelight. "A spirit of the river, one who should have been laid to rest, but was not. It walks now, hungry, thirsty, searching for blood, and it will not stop until what was broken is made whole again." His words sliced into me like knives. My stomach turned to stone, because I knew the broken thing was me. I had not buried grandmother as she instructed. I had followed most of her wishes, but not all. I had dismissed the final command as madness, afraid of what the villagers would say. Now, her wrath had taken shape. The beast was the price of my disobedience. I sat silently as the villagers wept and argued, each voice rising in fear. Some demanded grandmother's head, others begged for mercy. The witch doctor only shook his staff, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the fire. "It is here already," he whispered, watching. And in that moment, I swear I heard it too. A low growl, deep and guttural, rolling out from the night. The fires crackled, the goats bleated, and the villagers froze in terror. The beast was no longer a whisper. It was real, and it had come for us. The growl that night never left our ears. Even after the fires burned low and the villagers retreated into their huts, the memory of that sound followed us. It was not the cry of any lion or hyena I had ever heard. It was deeper, older, like the earth itself was groaning. I hardly slept. Each time my eyes closed, I saw grandmother's face hovering in the darkness, her mouth moving, whispering words I could not understand. When dawn finally broke, I rose with trembling hands and found Atupele already outside, staring toward the forest as if expecting the beast to step out at any moment. The village moved like a funeral procession that morning. No laughter, no trading, no children's games, only whispers. By mid-morning, the witch doctor summoned everyone to the square. He stood tall, his painted face smeared with ash and clay, his staff rattling with bones and charms. Around his neck hung a necklace of feathers and dried herbs that smelled of smoke. When he raised his hand, the villagers fell silent. "I have seen what walks among you," he said, his voice as heavy as the river in flood. "This is no ordinary beast. This is a spirit born of broken rights. You buried the old woman wrongly. You defied her instructions, and so the river spirit she carried has risen in anger." Every eye turned toward grandmother's hut. I felt the weight of their stares pressing on me. Sweat ran down my back. One of the men shouted, "Then kill her! Burn her! Only her death can free us." The witch doctor shook his head slowly. "No, she has already been judged by the river and returned. Her body walks, but her spirit is no longer bound to flesh. Strike her, and you will strike the land itself. Do you wish famine? Do you wish to bury all your children?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Some wept, some cursed under their breath. Chief Mateso stood with his arms crossed, jaw clenched, but even he looked uneasy. At last, the witch doctor lifted his staff again. "There is only one way. The one who failed her burial must confess. The one who ignored her last command must make it right. Only then will the beast return to the waters." My heart nearly stopped. His eyes swept across the crowd, and for a terrible moment, I thought they settled on me. I lowered my gaze, my chest tightening. My throat burned with words that refused to come out. Confess. How could I confess? If I admitted I had disobeyed grandmother's final wish, the villagers would turn on me. They already feared me for living under her roof. They would see me as her accomplice. Number. I could not. I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood, willing myself into silence. The villagers erupted into noise. Some cried out in despair, others demanded to know what the last command had been. But no answer came. The witch doctor only struck his staff against the ground. "If the guilty one does not step forward," he said, "the beast will claim 10 lives before the moon wanes. It has already tasted your cattle, your goats, and your children. Do not think it will stop. It will not rest until Kumbasa is drowned in blood." His words silenced the square. Even the babies stopped crying, as though the air itself had been sealed. That night, fear gripped the village tighter than ever. Fires burned at every corner, men patrolled with spears, and mothers kept their children close. But none of it mattered. The beast came again. We heard it before we saw it. The low growl rolling across the fields, the bleating of terrified goats, the screams of men trying to fight. I ran outside with a tupele, my legs trembling, and what I saw will never leave me. A shadow, massive and shapeless, moved at the edge of the fields. Its eyes glowed yellow like burning coals. Its body shifted, sometimes a lion, sometimes a hyena, sometimes something larger, something wrong. With a swipe of its claws, it sent 2 men crashing to the ground, their spears snapping like twigs. The villagers screamed. Some fled, some fell to their knees, some hurled rocks that vanished into the dark. The beast turned, snarled, and in an instant was gone, melting back into the night as if the shadows had swallowed it. When we gathered the fallen, 2 men were dead, their throats torn, their bodies mangled. The witch doctor stood over them, his face grim. "It has begun," he said. "The beast has claimed its first lives. And it will not stop until the guilty one confesses." My legs gave out beneath me. My hands shook so badly I could barely breathe. I felt Atupele's eyes on me, sharp and knowing. Later, as we sat by the fire, he leaned close and whispered, "Ndola, there's something you're not telling me." I couldn't answer. My chest felt like it was filled with stones. He gripped my arm. "If you know what she told you, you must speak." "You heard him. The beast won't stop. How many more will die before you say the truth?" Tears stung my eyes, but my tongue betrayed me. Fear sealed my lips tighter than any curse, and so I remained silent. But deep inside, I knew the witch doctor was right. The beast was not some wild creature. It was grandmother's shadow given flesh, and it was hunting us all. The night of reckoning came without warning. The moon was high, pale and swollen, casting long shadows across Kumbasa. The village lay silent, fires burning low, every hut locked in fear. No one dared speak of the beast anymore, because it had become part of the air we breathed. We heard its growls in the distance, smelled its stench in the fields, felt its gaze when we stepped outside. I had not confessed. Each day I told myself tomorrow. Tomorrow I will admit the truth. Tomorrow I will reveal grandmother's final command. But tomorrow never came, and the beast grew hungrier. That night, it came for me. I woke to scratching at my door. Long, dragging claws against the wood, slow and deliberate, like a reminder that I had run out of time. My sisters whimpered on their mats, covering their heads. Atupele sat upright, spear trembling in his hands. Then came the voice, "Ndola." It was not a beast's growl. It was grandmother's voice, low and familiar, the same voice that once called me in for ground nuts or told me to sweep the yard. But now it slithered through the cracks in the door, heavy with accusation. "You failed me. You disobeyed me. Now you must finish what you started." My blood turned to ice. The spear slipped from Atupele's hand as he clutched my arm. "It's her," he whispered, his eyes wide. "Ndola, it's her." The door creaked. A shadow spilled into the hut, filling every corner. The air stank of river mud and rotting flesh. Two glowing eyes fixed on me, and for a moment I saw her face within them. The wrinkled skin, the thin lips, the red shawl dripping with water. The beast had come. I stumbled to my knees, trembling so hard I could barely speak. "What do you want from me?" I cried. Her voice filled the room, shaking the walls. "You know what I want. You know what I commanded. You buried me wrongly. You left me restless. You bound me to the earth with disobedience. Now undo it, or Kumbasa will drown in blood." Atupele's eyes darted between me and the shadow. "Ndola, what is she talking about? What command?" The words clawed at my throat. For too long I had swallowed them, afraid. But now the truth tore its way out of me. "She told me." My voice cracked. "She told me that when she died, her coffin must be carried out through the goat kraal, not the front door. That her head must be laid at the foot of her grave, not the top. That coins must be buried in her mouth to pay the river. I did it all, but—" I broke, tears spilling down my cheeks. But she gave me one last command. She said I must slit the throat of a goat at midnight and pour its blood on her grave. She said without it, her spirit would wander. Gasps filled the hut. Miriam clapped her hands over her mouth. Atupele's face twisted in horror. "And you? You didn't do it?" I shook my head violently. "I was afraid." The villagers already thought her a witch. If they saw me spilling blood on her grave, they would have killed me. The beast roared, shaking the earth beneath us. The walls rattled, the fire died, and outside the dogs howled in terror. "Then you have doomed us all," grandmother's voice thundered, "unless you make it right tonight." Suddenly the shadow rushed toward me. I fell backward, choking on fear. But instead of tearing me apart, the beast coiled around me, cold and suffocating. Her voice whispered in my ear, "Go to my grave, Ndola. Take the goat, spill its blood, or watch your people burn." Then the shadow vanished. The scratching stopped. Silence returned. I gasped for air, my whole body trembling. Atupele knelt beside me, his face pale. "We have to do it," he whispered. "Whether it's witchcraft or madness, we have to." Minutes later, we led a trembling goat into the night. The village was silent, but I felt eyes watching from every hut. The beast's presence lingered in the air, urging me forward. We walked to the graveyard, my hands slick with sweat, the knife heavy in my palm. Grandmother's grave loomed before me, a mound of red earth still fresh. I knelt, tears streaming, and pressed the goat's neck to the soil. My hand shook so violently that Atupele had to steady me. Then I cut. The goat screamed, its blood spilling into the earth, dark and steaming in the moonlight. I poured it over the grave, my lips trembling as I whispered, "Forgive me, forgive me." The ground trembled, the wind howled through the trees. For a moment, I thought the earth would split open. Then slowly the grave grew still. The air lightened, the weight lifted from my chest. The beast did not come. For the first time in weeks, the night was silent. We stumbled back to the hut, shaken but alive. And in that silence, I realized something dreadful. The witch doctor had been right. It had not been the village's guilt that unleashed the beast. It had been mine. My silence, my disobedience, my fear. I had bound grandmother's spirit in anger, and I had nearly destroyed us all. The beast never returned after that night. No more goats were found headless in the fields. No more screams echoed in the darkness. The cattle roamed freely again, and the children began playing by the river without their mothers calling them back in terror. For the first time in months, Kumbasa breathed easily. But I did not. The villagers celebrated. They said the prayers had worked. The church choir sang longer and louder, claiming the Almighty had heard their cries and delivered them. Even the chief declared the curse broken, his booming voice filled with triumph. No one knew what had really happened. Only Atupele and I carried the weight of the truth. Sometimes as we worked in the fields, I caught him staring at me with a troubled look. He never spoke of that night, but his silence told me everything. He was afraid of me. Afraid that grandmother's blood lived on in me. Afraid that the beast had not gone but merely shifted into my shadow. And perhaps he was right. At night, I still dreamed of her. Not as the terrifying shadow, but as she was in life, sitting on her wooden stool, red shawl draped over her shoulders, smiling that tired smile. But in the dream, her eyes never blinked. They stayed fixed on me, unblinking, waiting. Sometimes she spoke. "You did well, Ndola. You are my blood. You carry my name. And one day, you will carry my burden too." Each time I woke drenched in sweat, my chest heavy with dread. I told no one. Weeks passed. The villagers slowly forgot their fear. Stories of the beast became whispers told to frighten children into staying home at night. They pointed at me again, but now not as the witch's grandson, but as the boy who had survived when others had not. I was the one who buried Madame Lulenga. I was the one who lived in her house and tended her fields. The villagers nodded at me with respect, some even with fear, but they did not know the truth. They did not know that when I poured the goat's blood on her grave, the soil had seemed to drink it greedily, as if thirsty for more. They did not know that I sometimes woke with the taste of iron on my tongue, though I had eaten nothing strange. They did not know that, on quiet nights, I could still hear scratching on the walls of my hut. A Tupele begged me once to leave the village with him, to go back to the city, start over, forget all of this. He said we were still young, that we could find work, build a life free of the shadows of Kumbasa Hills. But I could not. The land was mine now. The goats, the cattle, the orchard, all of it had been left to me. And though it felt more like a curse than a gift, I could not walk away. And so I stayed. And the longer I stayed, the more I realized something terrible. Grandmother had been preparing me all along. All those mornings by her side, listening to her call out greetings. All those lessons about family, about land, about blood. All those strange punishments she meted out to those who crossed her. She had been teaching me, not with words, but with shadows, with silence. And now, the silence was mine to carry, because silence has a price. It keeps secrets buried, but those secrets fester like wounds. They whisper at night, they claw at the heart, and if left too long, they grow teeth. I learned too late. I silenced grandmother's final command, and for that, the beast came. The village may never know. They may live in peace, believing their prayers saved them. But I know the truth. I know what stalks in the shadows when we break the promises of the dead. And now, as I sit outside her house in the early mornings, on her stool, wrapped in her red shawl, I feel the villagers' eyes on me. Some nod respectfully, others cross to the other side of the road. I do not call out greetings as she did. I only watch, because I know. One day, when my own blood refuses my final command, the beast will rise again, and this time it will not leave.